So for those of you in business, how do you run and scale a business?
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
And to discuss that, our guest today is Alan Pentz. He's a fellow EO member, but he's also a YPO member, and he's done amazing things. And so I begged him to be on the show, and he's here today. Alan, welcome to Fordify Live.
No begging needed. I'm happy to be on for it. It's great.
So we were talking in the green room a little bit about, you've done, millions with government contracting, but your real strength was your continual learning that you've applied, and you've made a lot of the mistakes so other people don't have to. How did you get into business and become an entrepreneur when you started?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not that dramatic a story. I working in the government contracting industry here in Washington, D.C. When I was working for got bought. And I had a client shift from one organization to another, and the opportunity presented itself. I had no conflicts from employment contracts, so I was able to just start my business. I started with a partner, and really, I think when I started, I was really a consultant who happened to own a company, and I happened to employ myself. And my journey's really been about the journey from being that to being a business owner who happens to own a government consulting firm. And I think even beyond that, it's really now I'm an investor who happens to own a government consulting firm amongst other holdings.
Can you give our listeners a sense of the scope of scale of your business?
Sure. I think we're on track to do about 35 million this year, probably do about closer to 50 next year. So we've really, in the last few years, picked up a lot of momentum and steam. And in my industry, it's a lot of compounding effort. You spend a lot of time getting your qualifications together, getting the right contract vehicles, people, and then once you kind of get those and hit it, you can really scale quickly. And we're kind of in that mode right now.
Well, on a separate note, so I have a digital agency called Prime Concepts Group, and pre-COVID, someone contacted me and said, "Hey, we'll help you get, GSA certified, GSA schedule." So I spent the money, and I went through it, and we created the page, and I jumped through the hoops, and we got our price list. We haven't sold zero, but we haven't actually tried to build any relationships. We've got all the databases. They keep sending me emails every day of open RFPs. And I look at those requests for proposals, and I'm just thinking, I don't do RFPs in my normal business. People know who I am, and they're like, "Hey, we want to spend the money with you." I send a proposal and it's done. So I haven't looked at that. We might talk about that towards the end of the show. But as far as growing a business, in all my years of helping organizations scale and grow, whether they're a franchise brand or an independent, the growth always came in one of three modalities of understanding. They were operations and sales, or operations and finance, marketing and sales, or the customer experience. So in your experience growing, and I know you've got a lot of experience in doing this, what did you see as some of the top obstacles that business owners experience that they need to overcome when they're growing?
Yeah, well, first of all, we can't talk about the government thing, but my thing is the government is its own economy. And so unless you'll notice that almost all companies are either 100% government or none until they get to be a lot bigger and have more resources. So that's just one
that
thing.
Makes sense.
And I have 1,000 stories of people who are like, "Hey, I might do a little business with the government." It's like, okay, you got 5 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, but on businesses in general, I really think businesses go through phases, and what they need to do during those phases is different, right? So when companies are smaller, when they're probably sub $1 million, $1.5 million, it's really all about the owner. And the one thing that the owner can do that no one else can do is sell. Because as I say, like, salesperson you're going to hire when you're $1 million or $1.5 million revenue company is not going to be the leader in the industry, right? And the people who are great salespeople, who could sell anything, they probably work at Oracle and make $2 million a year, right? So the business owner is really going to be the most talented person at sales. So I think the focus has to be 100% on getting everything else off the owner's plate, to even client delivery, or product delivery, or what, depending on kind of business you have. Those are more easily offloaded to other people than the sales process. So almost always my advice early on is owner, go sell more. If you are doing invoicing, if you are doing collections, if you're doing anything else, just stop it, right? That's a $10, $20 an hour task, and your selling is a five to $500,000 an hour task. So focus on that.
Yeah,
And then,
yep. I'd agree with the sales
yeah,
process. I know that in my team, I call myself the golden goose. And anytime they delegate up to something that really they should be doing, I ask them, is this the highest and best use of my time? You know, my time is better spent building relationships, doing the Fordify Live episodes, building relationships with C-level executives, not worrying about a deliverable when I've got an operations manager and a team.
100%. Yeah, and then when you grow a little bit, you know, you're more like 3 to 5 million, say, in revenue, and this is really for, you know, normal Main Street businesses. If you're venture funded, it can be a lot different because you can hire way ahead because you have funding. But, you know, for non-funded businesses, really in that range, being the center of everything, the hub and spoke model, I call it, that breaks down, right? The owner can't be everywhere. The volume's too great. And that's where I see the owner really having to focus on, hey, how do I get another major function of the company run by somebody else other than me that I don't need to be almost involved in at all, right? So if you're really good at sales, you're not going to go hire the salesperson. You're going to hire your finance person or your HR
Right.
person or your recruiter or an operations person, right? Now you can't probably at that level you can't hire a full team of leadership people, right? But you can hire one other really competent executive to help you, and that's really the challenge of offloading, trusting other people, setting it up so you can manage that person, having the right metrics in place so you can track it. And that's really that's a different challenge at 3 to 5 million, and it's expensive, right? You're hiring management labor, and that's usually completely unbillable or completely revenue generating, right? So a lot of people get stuck in that. Greg Crabtree calls that, you know, the business guru. Greg Crabtree calls that the black hole of business, and it's very difficult to do that. And look, only 4% of businesses ever make $1 million, and I think it's like 0.04% ever make 10 million. So you're seeing like a huge drop off in that process. So those are the first couple of stages, and then it goes on from there, right? Like a 10 to 15 million. The owner really, that's where I think most owners stop selling primarily. They might do big accounts or, you know, some kind of like an entry, you know, like when the big client first comes in, they do some stuff. But at that point, you really need to build a full leadership team where every single person on the team is capable of running their function, and that includes sales, because at that level, it's just almost impossible for an owner to keep up with the level of sales that need to be undertaken to actually support that kind of organization. And then, you know, beyond that, the owner really becomes the person architecting the leadership team and becomes really the conduit of the company too. Like I feel like the bigger, you know, you get to 25 million, 30 million where I am, it's more important for the owner to be connected to the market and spend a lot less time inside the company. Really the leadership team should be doing that. And the owner should be the kind of person who's, hey, where are people investing? What are the trends in M&A? What are the trends with customers? You know, those kinds of things become much more important. And that's the main focus at that point. So that's sort of how I see like the journey of the owner going.
That makes sense. Early on, when you started learning about business and business success, were there any books or mentors or lessons learned that you can recall that you say, man, I should have learned this lesson earlier?
Yeah, well, my number one was when we were about 4 million, and I was 85-90% customer billable. Didn't even know how to get into our bank account. We had a back office person running operations, and had no systems in place, no process, nothing. Place was chaotic. We all of a sudden, some of our work got reduced on a client contract, and we started losing money. I was, gosh, how did this happen? So really, that was the beginning of my transition. It was a wake up call. You know, we had to put some money on our line of credit, put some debt that, you know, we weren't collecting on. So it got, you know, at that point it was really scary. You know, it ended up not being a huge amount of money, but It was really scary at the time, and I wasn't sleeping well. And, I was like, this isn't working. We got to figure out how to do this better. And really the person that I found that helped me understand it was a guy named Greg mentioned earlier. And he had written a book called Simple Numbers. It's straight talk, simple numbers, big profits, I believe. And I actually first saw him on a YouTube video. And what he really was that your numbers in your company aren't really helping you. Your accountant is paying your taxes, right? And they're not really helping you understand what you need to know to run your company. And what he had realized he was a CPA working with a lot of other business owners, prominent EO member, was that almost all the people that other business owners that he interacted with, and all the businesses he saw, their labor was the biggest cost within every single business. And the problem was that if you look at your P&L, labor is split across, 4, 5, 8 categories, right? And what owner is going through you're looking at like dues and subscriptions and like this and this line, that line. Business owners look at their P&L and they're like falling asleep or eyes are glazing. They don't want to do that shit. So what Greg really realized is like, hey, I got to come up with a system that helps you focus on what you're paying for labor and what you're getting from that. And so he came up with this idea around the labor efficiency ratio, where he really wants you to measure how much revenue, how many dollars of revenue. And for him, it's really revenue minus, say, subcontractors and people where you're just kind of sending the money back out the door. So we call that sort of real revenue. But for the sake of argument, say it's revenue. How many dollars of revenue am I making for every dollar of salary that I pay to employees? And he calls that the labor efficiency ratio. And that was a real revelation for me. And look, I run a consulting business, so doubly important on labor. Labor is how we make money. And to be honest, almost every business is just something put together with labor to create productivity and value for customers. So, starting to understand that, looking across, now I could calculate a labor efficiency ratio for every single person in our company. And I could see, we're losing money on this person. Like, we're making $1.50 on this person, but we're making $4 on this other person. Like, what's on here? Why is the delta so large? And that started me down the road. I hired Greg's company, still work with him today. And that really started me down the journey of like, hey, you got to start making the super important in making in your business, and labor being one of the key ones. So that was probably one of the first real learnings I had that totally transformed the way I look at business.
Yeah, I know that, my agency, I've had it for 34 years, and, I've always focused on marketing and sales and, hire your weaknesses. And I had operations, had an in-house CFO and, accounting, bookkeeping person. And we have our weekly CEO meetings, but I'm a keynote speaker, so I'm on the road sometimes. And so I came back from off the road, and after doing a bunch of keynote presentations for some franchise groups, and I sat down with my CFO, and they said, hey, we want to give the report for the last 90 days because it was a quarter. And I ended up learning that I had 5 people that weren't generating anything for a quarter. So that's $150,000 quarter. And I just sat there just looking at these numbers going, you got to be kidding me. They didn't, all the objectives that we had set just didn't get done. Now I'm responsible for everything. Everything goes to the top down. I'm not blaming anybody else, but it was interesting how quickly that labor went out. And, profit hides a lot of mistakes. When I go in as a strategic advisor into other organizations and I look at their marketing, their sales, and what they're doing to try to scale, usually that's the first place I look is, okay, let's do a benchmark of everything you're spending. And let's look at, on a scale of 1 to 10, is it working? Whether it's in marketing side or the operational side, because now with the subscription economy, people are paying for a bunch of subscriptions and platforms that they don't need. When we do a tech stack review, I'll find out that they're paying hosting for 2 different companies. They're paying $1,500 a month for SEO, and they don't even have any SEO, and their homepage just says home. There's just so much waste. And as an owner, I think, what I've done over the years is I trust people, I delegate, and I'm assuming they're going to do their job. And unfortunately, just because you're writing a check doesn't mean they're doing their job.
That's right. Yeah. And as you go building those management systems and early warning systems, tracking systems, something like that, what you're talking about, when you work with Greg, right, he's there every month, or his people are there every month, like, hey, these people, this labor efficiency. And actually what's great about them is they then break that down into the people directly serving customers and the ones in the back office. He's like, hey, your direct labor efficiency is going in the tank. What's going on here? So, as you're taking that journey, and I love your point. I mean, profit and growth hide a lot of sins, right? And unfortunately, if you're really growing and you're charging enough so the profit is there and you can fund it, you fund your growth, you can really be setting up a bunch of dysfunctional parts of your company that when that growth slows down a bit, it's going to kill you. And
that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, you just
systems.
mentioned it. I had a sporting goods company. I grew it up to 140 employees, and it was, I sold $50 million of this bike rack, and that's gross sales. That wasn't profit, but I was real profitable and had cash flow coming in, but I wasn't really looking at the profitability as much. And a lot of business owners, they look at their bank account to do cash flow, which is not the way to do it, of course. And but you'd be surprised that even EO members that make millions. I'm like, do you understand your financials? I'm like,
100%.
no, I have someone who does that. And I said, so you don't know what your chart of accounts are? You don't know what your balance sheet and income statement? You don't know what your inventory turn is? And they're like, no, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you need to know, just so that you can look at it. So I did the same thing. I was making money, but I wasn't really looking at the full picture until COVID came. My speaking drives all my leads, right? So when I'm speaking, the audience members end up being customers, or the client ends up hiring me. And so all that dried up, and I still had agency business. I had retainer business, but we really had to sharpen the pencil. And we had a few employees that were, in position only. They really weren't producing near enough of what they could have. And again, that goes back to management and leadership. Now, I just for the purposes of this, we are live right now on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and a few other places. What's the name of Greg's company for the podcast, so that people can, if they're listening, they can check him out?
I think he's in I think you can get to him simplenumbers.me, and his company was sold to a large accounting firm called
What's his last name?
So they're within that umbrella. Crabtree.
Greg Crabtree.
Chicken farmer from Alabama.
All right. Yeah. Well, the important thing is, even if you don't know who that guy is, for those listeners out there, the important thing is your action step from today's episode is really go back and look at your numbers. When was the last time you really took a sharp look at your balance sheet and income statement? Are you really looking at line item by line item? And what was the labor quotient called before? It was labor efficiency value.
Labor efficiency ratio, LER.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I'm going to be doing that
too. How many dollars of revenue are you making for every dollar you charge for every dollar salary you're paying? I mean, it's a simple thing to calculate, and it's hugely beneficial. Like, one example I'll give you is, like, Greg always talks about a lawn care, landscaping kind of business he was working with. And he broke down that labor efficiency into direct labor efficiency. Like, so how many dollars of real revenue minus subs are you getting for every dollar you pay in direct labor, right? For people actually going out mowing lawns, doing stuff. And so this guy had a commercial lawn mowing business, and he had a lawn care, which is like fertilization and stuff like that, right? Lawn maintenance or something like that. So on the commercial mowing side, he was like $1.80 in revenue for every dollar he paid for sending someone out to mow. On the lawn care or maintenance side, he was getting $4 for every dollar of direct labor. So guess what that guy did? He never realized that it was all blended together for him, right? It was just an average that he was seeing. But then when he saw that separated out, he's like, no more marketing to commercial mowing, right? Like, we'll take it if it comes, and we'll keep employing those people. It's still profitable. But look, we are making, more than double the amount of money over here on the lawn maintenance. So let's build out that part of our business. So that's how it could be really powerful. Yeah,
I've had 17 different companies. One of my companies was a carpet cleaning business. I ran it for 5 years and sold it, and it ran for another couple decades. And when we used to put carpet treatment down, the stain preventative, you'd put it in a little bug sprayer, and you'd pump it up and you'd spray it out. that would make us 300% more money than the actual carpet cleaning. Like it was the, treating the carpet. So, I always told my team.
By the way, 17 companies. I'm already tired listening to that.
Well,
okay.
Look, I'm an entrepreneur, so it's because I see shiny objects. Squirrel, right? I mean, it's not. They all weren't. Three went seven figure. Some of them were I just abandoned and started it, ran it. I had kiosks in the mall. I've invented a lot of products and patented them, and all my patents made money. One of them was copied by Huffy Bicycle, and I took a settlement and walked away from it. So every time I see that product in a store, kind of pisses me off. But I'm just an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, that's when I first got into EO. One of the reasons I joined EO was I was actually brought in at the global conference. I was one of the keynote speakers at one of the global events, and then they were saying, "Hey, you should join EO." And I'm like, I was 45 or whatever, and I'm like, "What's EO?" Other than I was speaking there. Right. And then I thought, well, wow, that sounds great because you're around, safe space to really share your ideas. So for those of you that are in EO, we've got EO members that listen. We've got private equity groups. We've got franchise executives, franchisees, franchise brands. Most of the people who listen to this show are some revenue generating entrepreneur. Maybe they're startups or they're, like you that are doing great. What's on the future for you as we wrap up today's episode? What are you excited about doing now? I mean, now you've got your company running, you're doing well, and the government, and what's on your horizon?
Yeah, I mean, really, I want to start teaching about some of the lessons that I learned. Took me, sleepless nights looking at YouTube, trying to find answers, right? And should have gotten to EO and YPO as well, but earlier. But really, what I'd like to do, I started a newsletter and podcast called The Small Business Mentor. And I'm really trying to consolidate a lot of the lessons that I learned. It took me 10 years of picking around and doing all this different stuff and going to learning events and going to entrepreneurial education classes and all this different stuff. And, every, 80% of that is not worth it. And then the 20% is gold, right? So right. What I'd love to do is really start teaching and putting that together into more. Now, I don't have this yet, but I'm working on putting that into more of a system, sort of like almost like a small business MBA that you could really go through and really get the best lessons on how to run a business much faster and much more efficiently. Because there are, there's not one way to do it, but there are best practices that multiple entrepreneurs have used and gotten success out of. And it's just, to me, it's like a random assortment of concepts out there that no one's ever put together and said, hey, this is how you should really be thinking about it.
Well, that sounds really exciting. When you get ready to do that, you've got my number. You could reach out. I mean, we've worked with literally thousands of speakers, trainers, authors, coaches, and consultants to help them monetize their expertise. So for those of you that are in that role, and for Alan, here are the 5 things to think about. One is your core expertise. You've got that in spades. You've been doing it. You've got your lessons learned. On number 1, what I'd recommend you do is you write down all your significant emotional events. You either do a mind map or a capture, an Excel spreadsheet of all the lessons, so you can start to chunk them into certain categories so you know what modules and what you would do. So 1 is your core expertise. Number 2 is your revenue model. How are you going to sell it? Are you going to do a paid podcast? Are you going to do a membership community? Are you going to do an online community, an online academy, a masterclass, a LinkedIn learning? What are you going to do to package it? And what's your revenue model? So like for my revenue model, I have 5 revenue streams. So I do speaking and training, which is corporate keynotes and consulting. I've been doing it for 34 years. I'm in the Hall of Fame. It's much different when you're starting out versus, my fees now are much bigger than they were when I started, when I go into an organization. But you got to have a revenue model. So mine is speaking, corporations, associations, and then I put on public events where I get the butts and seats and rent a venue out and invite people. And that's virtual and in person. I do consulting, but my consulting is pretty straightforward. It's $500 for the first call. I don't sell hours, and then it goes to $15,000 a month for 3 months, or $25,000 if it's a brand for 90 days. Because consulting, if you don't get prepaid up front, people assimilate the ideas they get and automatically assume they're theirs. So you got to make sure if you're consulting, you've been consulting your whole life. I don't have to tell you that. So consulting is number 2.
Government pays. They put a contract down.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a good part.
And number 3, and then my revenue model is products. So digital, I have an online learning system, LMS system, and people can buy customized training through products. And then because I speak about digital marketing, people want to learn it. C-level executives don't want to do it. So that's why I have the agency. So it started as direct response, but now it became internet because direct,
I love that last model. I love. I've seen, this is what I think is happening. I just did an episode with a guy named Lauren Feldman, who wrote multiple entrepreneurial columns for Inc. and New York Times and others. And now he has a newsletter and podcast called 21 Hats. And I was talking to him about his business model because it's very rudimentary in beginning, right? He just started this. And, what I've seen a lot now is people building businesses that either, like obviously you can build a business around what you do, around the media that you do, or you build the media around the business that you have. But now you're increasingly seeing people building audiences and then plugging in businesses that might not even be about what they're talking about. So you look at I don't know, the guys at My First Million, like one of them started, one of them invested in offshore recruiting company and then built, talked about it on a show, and they were able to drive it to, millions of dollars in revenue very quickly. And then the other one started a competitor to YPO and EO called Hampton. And so they get the distribution first through the media, and then they kind of build or invest in businesses around it, which I think is the most compelling model, right? Because you can, if you get a big enough audience, the investing is even better because you don't have to do the work, right?
Right.
So you don't have to actually do the fulfillment or the management of the company. So I think it's a really interesting model.
Yep. And so quick review, you got to have your core expertise. You got to have your revenue model. Then you've got to be able to deliver it on stage and through podcasts and, virtual presentations. And then number 4 is your digital footprint. So if someone Googles your name, what shows up? And that's your website, search engine ranking, your Google business listing, getting Google reviews, business directory listings like EO and YPO and the Chamber, whatever other associations you're a member of. And then, of course, your social media. And your social media, you don't have to be everywhere, but you have to be where the fish are. So for me, I'm on LinkedIn and YouTube more often. I am on TikTok with some things for social proof. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook, but that's not really my market. I mean, they're not going to hire a $30,000 keynote off of Facebook necessarily, but it's visibility. And then the 5th thing is you got to take action. So it's your core expertise, your revenue model. You got to be great on stage or delivery. You got to have a digital footprint. And then you just got to take action. I mean, one of the reasons I have this show is, I interview a lot of C-level executives that are successful, just like you. And then that also builds a relationship with them. So, for example, I had a CEO on my show. We talked to him about the growth of his franchise brand. And then because we got to meet and spend, 30, 40 minutes on the call, then he said, hey, why don't you come in and speak to our corporate conference, which obviously was the goal, but not the goal. Like I wasn't trying to sell him, but it's about building the relationships. There's never been a time in history where, with a webcam and a good camera, you can get access to people. Like I wouldn't be sitting with a CEO of a $30 million company without having a platform. So it's great.
Right. Can I add a number 6?
Sure. And
Always
7.
have a 5-point plan.
Always have a 5-point plan. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good.
I think everyone it's 4 or 5 points that steps or whatever is key.
It really is. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. Stick around. We'll do the closing here quick, and I'll just say our goodbyes. But you've been listening to Alan Pentz. He's the CEO of Corner Alliance. He's also the host of the Small Business Mentor newsletter and podcast. Alan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.